some of the subjects. But what I had put together was pretty comprehensive look at how we got started, and then through the very intense Vietnam period, and which coincided, with the whole Earth Day movement. And there's a lot of interesting things to say about that, how it got started, and a relationship between Vietnam and Earth Day, military concerns versus peace concerns versus the more domestic concerns, how you go about establishing an environmental thrust in a community. And so that's a sort of history that I feel closest to, and maybe can have a little more.
Sure.
To say about that. So now I don't know. Do you want? Is it all right for me to look down at something in front of me,
sure.
because I have?
The only thing is, don't try not to hide it. Then just have it right. So we're not trying to have you look off. Just have it there. That's perfectly fine. And if you want to pull the books in a little bit, you're welcome.
Okay. Yeah. Because they're kind of an exhibit.
If you'd like coffee or tea, or again.
Okay.
There's no limit.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just let you take off. You just start whenever you feel like it, and take it as far as you go. If we find, if we've got to ask you something,
Sure. Well, what I had put together was a bit of a history of the Earth Day movement, the first Earth Day, and to begin with, how we locally were involved, how Missoula, western Montana, was involved in the whole environmental movement. And even at the time of Earth Day, which was 1970, a lot of people thought that this was something new, this concern was something new. And it's true that most of the publicity about it had really come out perhaps a couple of years before Earth Day itself. But as a matter of fact, we here in Missoula have a rather long history of concern with the environment. And it goes back, for example, clear to the 50s, the early 50s even, and right through the 50s with the concern about atmospheric nuclear testing of atmospheric, nuclear weapons in the atmosphere by mostly the major nuclear powers, U.S. and Soviet Union. And at that time, there were many scientists who were concerned with what the effects of radioactive fallout were likely to be with the population, and especially with children. So kind of spontaneously around the country, about 20 or so committees were established. There were independent people not connected with the government in any way, mostly at universities, scientists, not only biological scientists, but others as well, physicists, chemists, or anyone else who had a concern with this. And their main interest was to educate themselves and the general public about the effects of mainly the effects of radioactive fallout on people. And so we had such a committee. One of the first committees established in the 50s was here in Missoula. And originally we called ourselves Western Montana Scientist Committee for Radiation Information, and was part of a national effort which was led, you might say, by such people as Barry Commoner and Margaret Mead. And what we did was educate ourselves about the effects of radiation, and then to go out and give public presentations of one kind or another. Our feeling was that it was essential, because there's quite a debate raging about what the effects were, whether people needed fallout shelters and so on. So our main concern was to get the facts out as objectively as possible, and let the people decide what should be done in the way of public policy about this. And
could you give me a little bit of is your expertise? Who are you, basically? I mean,
Oh.
what has been your
Well,
interest area?
I've been on the faculty here at the university in the botany department. My background is in physiology of plants, also diseases of plants, and I had a special interest in the effects of radiation on plants. I've done some research along those lines, and so I sort of came naturally to this concern about the effects of radiation, not only on plants but on other organisms as well. But I want to emphasize that others in the committee, we had dentists, doctors, zoologists like Bert Pfeiffer, people like Les Pengelly, Bill Norman was a member of our committee. Of course, Clancy Gordon was a member of our committee. Tom Power, I guess, in the early days. Bob Curry, who was a geologist. And our feeling was that even if we were not experts in a particular area, like radiation, we had enough background so we could educate ourselves in the salient basic features of this so that we could then transmit this to the public in a way that they could understand. This was really a kind of new invention, this whole idea of science information committees, of independent people, where the whole thrust was to present the material in as objective a scientific way as possible, but in a way that the average person could understand. And we thought this was extremely important in a democracy to be done this way. There were a lot of people at the time, a lot of scientists at the time, who thought that we should take a stand in terms of, let's say, fallout shelters, one way or the other, in our basic presentation to a PTA. And many of us felt that it was important for us to not take a stand on whether you should build a shelter or not in that part of our talk, but to just present the facts about what the shelter could do or couldn't do, and then let the public make up their mind. During the question and answer period, of course, people would ask us, what is your opinion? And we would present it. And that's when things got pretty controversial. As I pointed out, we did have some physicians, radiologists, for example, who were concerned about this problem, who were members of our committee. And things got a little hot when, during some of these question and answer periods, we would be asked our opinion about some of these things, and the opinions were quite controversial at the time, and this was publicized in the newspapers and media in general. And because of this controversy, some of the physicians decided to quit our committee because they didn't want to be involved in any kind of activity that became controversial in a public way. In fact, when they wrote us the letter indicating they wanted to quit, that was, I think, sometime in December in the late 50s, early 60s perhaps. They made it retroactive to the time they joined, which was in October. So, you know, they were kind of nervous about it. But I must say that people like Bill Norman stayed with us. And,
well, what was the controversy?
The controversy was, for example, if I were asked in the question and answer period, are you going to build a shelter? I said, no, I don't think it's going to do any good. At least it's not the solution. It's we're diverting our attention from what the real issue is, which is to see that these weapons are not used. That's where we're going to put our effort and not into building the shelters. Well, the civil defense people were sort of unhappy about this, and so there was a big stink made about it in the papers, and some of the physicians just weren't up to that kind of heat. So, but that's how we got started. That was a crucible in which we went through that sort of thing early in the game.
I was going to ask you, is there an event that triggered that for you, or how did you decide to become an activist, essentially?
Oh my God, that goes back to, you know, my early days, because I had a politically conscious family. You know, we were very much into politics, and growing up in New York, you know, you can't avoid getting interested in what's happening in the world, because it just impinges on you. You can't escape, you know. But I think that there were so many events that happened in my formative years, you know, such as the Spanish Civil War, for example, and the you know, the Nazi regime, of course, had quite an impact on me as I was growing up. Then the development of the atom bomb, you know, I think any scientist would recognize that what the implications were, the fact that, first of all, that science had a lot to do with development of the atomic weapon, and so there's a special responsibility that I felt to see that, you know, it wasn't used and that the effects were prevented. And I don't know, just naturally I always enjoyed the outdoors, for example. I was always, even when I was a little kid in New York, always going off into parks, and as soon as we came out west, of course I became quite an outdoors person, and certainly here in Montana. And so I was always concerned with what was happening to our forests, to our waters. You know. So it just seemed like it was a natural thing for me to get involved in this sort of thing. And at that time, there were a fair number of us, you know, a dozen or so here in little U of M that were involved in this committee. It was more common in those days to do things jointly, to have committees of this sort that, you know, expressed a public concern. I think that's one thing that's happened to our life generally, certainly to the scientific community, that more and more we've become inward looking and directed, and there are understandable reasons why a young scientist has to look after his grant applications and research, because it's important for him to advance. I guess it was important then too, but somehow or other we found the time to get together. It just seemed a natural thing. First to do it this way, but this is less likely to be the case now on a campus. Everyone is so involved in their own special work that they don't seem to have the time.
So the group that worked on the radiation studies in the 50s, then was the same group that went in the 60s?
Essentially the same group. Not that we weren't concerned with the, you know, the domestic concerns as well. Even before then, you know, Missoula was always a center of environmental interest. The Clark Fork River was a raw sewage dump for many years, until the early 50s, I guess. And every once in a while, the Clark Fork would run red, really, with stuff that came out of above us, you know, from the tailings and other sources above us in the Clark Fork River. We had always had environmental problems as far as air pollution is concerned here in Missoula because of our, you know, geographic situation. And we had lots of teepee burners at the time too, and other industries like big laundries downtown that were putting out a lot of black smoke. So we were always made quite conscious of it. And then, of course, on top of that, we had the Horner-Waldorf pulp mill that came in '57 that transformed the whole scene in terms of air pollution here in Montana, in Missoula, western Montana. So we always had these other concerns too, but I have to say when we first started, we were most concerned with the question of radioactive fallout and nuclear war. And when when the test ban treaty, the limited test ban treaty, was signed in '63, so that atmospheric testing can no longer take place, this took a lot of the pressure off that concern, and so we did become more involved in the more domestic, non-military questions as well. Some of us were still quite concerned with the fact that we still had plenty of nuclear weapons and the Cold War was still going on, and so the nuclear war and its effects were still very much in our minds. But I'd say the bulk of the work of the committee probably had to do with the non-military, with the more domestic, civilian problems. And those, of course, will continue up to this day. The problems continue. But a very critical part of our history had to do with the Vietnam experience, because there, in Vietnam, both types of concerns came together, the military and the non-military aspects. That is, it was a question of just the war and the effects of the war on the people there and the implications for how that might escalate into a confrontation between the major nuclear powers. That was very much on our minds. And then the special interest in the use of herbicides, for example, and say Bert Pfeiffer, and to a lesser extent I was involved in some of that. And so we continued as a committee and supported the whole teach-in movement. I don't know if you remember. Again, this was a continuation of the approach of educating the public, of trying to do things in as objective a way as possible. Just bring the issues out about Vietnam, how it started, what it's likely to do, to public meetings. Rather than saying, we're opposed to our involvement, we would show what the effects our involvement were likely to be. And so we were part of that whole teach-in movement as well. And we had a very active group here on campus, which included staff, faculty, students especially. And that, was a kind of situation where the concerns with peace and war really overlapped with our concerns with the more civilian aspects, because the herbicides that were being in Vietnam, for example, were also being used on a very large scale in this country, in Montana as well, and on a large mass scale. And so I didn't think that there was any conflict between a concern for Vietnam and concern for the more civilian problems. Some of our committee members thought that the continuing our concern for the more civilian aspects of the problem would divert from the need to keep after the Vietnam adventure.
What was your feeling about that time? I mean, emotionally, as you had the feelings change from the war era to the 60s era? I mean, the nuclear war threat versus the Vietnam War era. I'm just wondering.
Well, yeah, emotionally. Yeah, well, Vietnam was such a wrenching experience. This is for me, thanks, because my voice is. Vietnam was much more explosive issue in the sense that it involved so many more people. Nuclear war thing seemed, sort of in the background. People thought about it, but they tried not to. But with Vietnam, you couldn't avoid thinking about it because it was right there, and the boys were going over there, and they were coming back in body bags and so on. And you could see it on TV. So in a sense, it was a much more involved issue. And what some of us were concerned about Vietnam because of what it could lead to in terms of U.S.-Soviet confrontations. It would just seemed like a ever-present possibility that it could escalate into that. So the peace war issue was still the major peace war issue, transcended the Vietnam experience. And I felt that there was no, it was just about at that time, of course, that Earth Day came on the scene. And some people thought that this was a way to divert concern from the Vietnam War. I don't know. I can't assess that. I know personally, and most of my colleagues, we didn't find this a diversion. So we were concerned with both, and we're still concerned with what was happening, locally in the U.S. and in to our environment in general from influences other than the war. Still concerned with the pesticides, with the air pollution and so on. See, it had just been shortly before that as I said, the Horn of Waldorf came into Missoula, and there was a big movement to do something about what it was doing to our air. And so I didn't feel personally that prevented me from, taking a very active role. I did receive some flack about that time too. We had a grant, our committee had a grant to look into solid waste problems. And that was sort of, that's 15 years or so ago. And a lot of people said, well, why be concerned with that? That's the sort of thing that we faced when we still have the Vietnam War to terminate. And well, that was just a matter of personal conscience. I felt that was an important issue, and we can't just neglect one side or the other. I mean, I never felt that a person could neglect the domestic side while we were concerned about these other more cosmic, what you might consider more cosmic problems, like peace and war.
Was there then a great rift in your scientific group?
Oh, I wouldn't say there's a great rift. Some individuals may have been upset about it, but
about
it wasn't.
Earth Day.
Yeah, right. For that reason.
How did you first hear about Earth Day?
Oh gosh, it was. It had been coming on for several years, and it's an interesting thing. I don't know whether I can comment on or try to explain how it all came together, because it seemed to just slowly build up over a period of several years. It just seemed a natural thing for it to happen. I think that that some of the more vocal, forceful individuals like Paul Ehrlich, for example, who was mainly concerned with the population problem. People like that had a lot to do with promoting the public awareness about these problems, because he was such an effective and energetic speaker.
Maybe you could give us a description of Earth Day 1960 in Missoula. I know I wasn't here then yet.
1970, right?
No, oh yeah, 1970.
1970, yeah.
First Earth Day.
Well, aside from that famous walk that Clancy Gordon sponsored up to the top of Sentinel, or up to the M, I don't remember too much about what happened in Missoula on Earth Day. Because, well, for one thing, Arnie Soderman and I were asked to make a presentation at Havre, at Northern Montana College. And we went a few days before, or a day before, and didn't come back until a day or so later. So we pretty much missed the Earth Day presentation here, but, pardon? Aber Day? Well, Aber Day is, I think, in
May.
yeah, I don't know whether Aber Day had, it's usually in May though, isn't it?
It's John May's birthday.
Uh-huh. We may have had something. I vaguely remember they had a meeting in the lodge. I guess it must have been up in what was the ballroom at that time, which is now the second floor food service, or I guess they've converted that all to offices. But at that time, there was a ballroom and meetings were held. And I vaguely remember making a presentation there. So I know things happened on campus. I don't know whether it involved the whole community or not. I know that something, it was celebrated here in Missoula, but as I say, I wasn't here at the time, and so I don't have a very good memory of what actually happened right here in Missoula.
Were you excited about it? Did you think, oh, here we go, or what did you think?
Oh, I thought it was great. I thought it was fine. I thought it was kind of a continuation of what we've been doing for quite a few years. In a sense, it wasn't that unique, because we have been doing this sort of public. Well, the teach-ins, I mentioned the teach-ins. We've been doing that. We've been making the presentations to public groups, sometimes small groups, and sometimes fairly large groups. So we've been doing that sort of thing. Well, I'm not going to say that we were jaded about it, but it wasn't, that.
It seemed organic.
Yeah, it seemed part of what we had been doing, and I assume we would continue to do that sort of thing.
So how would you assess the Earth Day today? I mean, what kind of shape do you think we're in?
Well, I think we've made some progress. Just to take the example of the air pollution in the Missoula Valley, I guess we've got it under fairly, some sort of control. And of course, there was a group called GASP, Gals Against Smoke and Pollution, that was set up, and Flo was involved in that, and they were quite effective in doing something about the pulp mill, and I think that had a lot to do with the kind of leadership we got in the county health office with Kit Johnson, for example. He was very active in the whole air pollution fight. We did get a Environmental Policy Act. Montana Environmental Policy Act was one of the first in the nation. May have been the model for what happened nationally, for NEPA. And then, the Montana Constitution is also, I think, quite unique in that it has the environmental clause in it, which it's good to have there. I don't think we've really followed up on what it says. It doesn't permit degradation of the Montana environment. So, I think we've certainly made progress along those lines, but I think we have a long way to go. Sometimes I feel that we're not getting at the basic, essential roots of the problem. Just take this whole solid waste thing. Well, 15 years ago, we had these workshops all around the state and the region and told people what needed to be done. Well, now there seems to be a lot of concern with the waste problem as it impinges on us more and more, but even so, I don't feel that we're doing anywhere near what we could be doing along those lines. I mean, you go to a store, and surely there should be an incentive, a financial incentive, not just a moral incentive, not to take all this packaging. In other words, you bring your own canvas bag, as an example, you should not have to pay as much for your groceries, or vice versa. If you take a bag from them, But if you take a bag from them, they should charge you for it. Somebody should pay, because we are paying, for both the paper and the plastic that's used.
And the styrofoam.
And the well, that's plastic, okay. That's used in packaging. And, I don't see any real deep thrust to get at the roots of the problem, which would prevent the production of all the waste in the first place. You're not really addressing that problem. And the recycling is fine, but we have to prevent the production of all this waste. And that might take a basic structural change in our economic system, in the way we do things. The market is now sacrosanct. Right now, especially that Eastern Europe, they're throwing away their socialist, or at least much of their socialist approach. Now the market capitalism is considered sacrosanct. But I think that we've got to modify it too considerably before we can solve some of these problems. But you do get the impression that even with all the people talking about global warming and the ozone and so on, and some governments are concerned, that it will take a catastrophe or catastrophes to get the average person to finally insist that something be done.
But we've had those catastrophes.
Yeah, but it's not on a large enough a scale. We haven't had it. All right, what have we had here in Montana, for example?
Well, we've got the mess in Butte. It's going to come all the way up the river.
Yeah.
And right here in our own river city.
Right, but we don't want to have that. We don't want more catastrophes of that type. That's the whole point. We're reacting to it. We didn't prevent it in the first place. And the question: will we prevent subsequent catastrophe? Let's take the whole mining question, for example. Here I read in this morning's paper that Sanders County and Mineral County and Sanders County are fighting as to who will get the tax benefits from this huge new mine that's being proposed at Libby, right? To mine metals whose actual economic value is very marginal in terms of what we really need, for productivity in this country. It's true that gold brings a lot of income these days, and silver or whatever. And so some people stand to profit, and there are a few jobs involved there too. But, who needs a huge mining complex in such a beautiful area? Such places are rare, very few and far between in the world anymore. The kind of scenery that we have in the Libby area where this mine is going. It's right next to the wilderness, so you can imagine what it's like. Well, that's the problem. When will we see that we act?
What's going on here psychologically? We can look at industry and call it greed, but what's going on psychologically with the rest of us?
Well, I see a certain kind of apathy to act before the axe falls. There's a certain apathy that people seem to have. That there's a kind of inward, looking, following our own immediate concerns, and not thinking of the social costs.
Does the apathy? What's that based on, though?
Oh well, that's complicated. It's the Reagan Revolution is part of it, I think. And I don't know. I really don't know why people don't take a message from what they're doing in Eastern Europe, for example, and say, look, we've had enough, and we're going to do something about it, and start demonstrating in the streets about it. This whole business of the health care, for example. If anything calls for a public outcry, it's the whole mess, our health care mess. I keep getting stuff from Medicare, for example. I don't know how much paper involved in my getting a $2 check from them. I'm sure it must cost, who knows, at least 10 times that much to send out all the paperwork. Well, there's something very basic. These are basic changes that have to be made, and so it's not just apathy. It's just that in order to change this, will require rather deep structural changes in the way we do things in this country. And that's still the case. Even, we've papered over a lot of our problems, let's say with air pollution here and there and everywhere, but we don't seem to be getting at the essential problems, the roots of the problems. And it's just going to require, people have to change, and our whole way of approaching these problems is going to have to change.
Are you essentially hopeful or essentially?
Well, I've always considered myself an optimist, because I do look back. After all, we have somehow or other, we've set the clock back, for example, on the nuclear war. It's been set back a few minutes, and even though we still have the weapons, and they're still there in the silos, certainly the whole political climate has been changed. And I think the fact that the effects of what the likely effects of a nuclear war would be, I think that's had an influence, I'm sure. And so, I do see some hopeful signs, and I think we have no choice but to just keep plugging away. But I'd like to see more of my younger colleagues and more actively, more deeply involved in this, because that seems to be quite a difference between now and then.
How about the kids coming up here? Would there be any wild hippies again?
Well, I don't know about hippies, but I get the impression that a lot of the young folks are very much concerned with us, with all these questions. They're very knowledgeable, and they're very concerned, and whether they'll be seduced by our market economy or not, and the consumer crazes that are generated. I don't know. I think I've seen at least some change in the general outlook of students here on campus. Let's say from the early Reagan years to now, I see quite a bit more concern and more willingness to get involved in these things. And certainly that's true of certain kinds of students, like those in the environmental studies department here. And well, we've seen how this has perhaps impacted this whole recent business with the subpoenas that were handed out here some months ago. It seemed hard to imagine that this would be done, especially considering some of the people who were subpoenaed, like Ron Erickson. I think it just.
Do you have any insight into that?
Well, the only insight, I have a natural suspicion that this was done to tone down some of the environmental concerns that are being expressed, and perhaps, as far as Montana goes, mostly over the timber management issue, because what provoked it, of course, was the spiking that was done in Idaho. But that's only a part, that's a symptom of what's been going on. And I think that some of the private timber interests are very much concerned with all the public interest in land management. As the private lands are more and more overutilized, more and more pressure is being put on the public lands, and that's a place where the public can have quite an impact. And so I think that it's that's just a guess. I can't prove it, but the private timber companies have shown themselves capable of boycotting a television program on the use of old-growth forests that was put on by the Turner Network, by getting some influential advertisers to pull their advertising from them. So we know that they're playing hardball. There's no question about it. And I think the recent grand jury and might be part of that, but I'd say we don't have the concrete evidence, but it would seem to be.
Nor do they.
Well, we haven't received it yet. We haven't seen it. So who knows? That's an issue that, at least as far as Montana goes, could really escalate further and further, because I don't see any real solution to that problem until there is let's say, something like a Forest Practices Act for the state, and this should be part of a national thing, where we actually monitor the harvest, so that we know that it's being done in a very, very biologically sound way. And that's being fought.
Well, I want to get back to the psychological thing, because I know you know something that I don't. How is it that people can go out to an old growth forest
Mm-hmm.
and see board feet instead of trees?
Oh man. Well, there are a few people whose jobs, depend on it, and I can understand that. It's difficult for me to understand why they don't look at that forest. They don't get the same psychological boost from walking through such a forest that I do. I assume that I get it because it's something very primal and basic to how we evolved, as part of a natural scene. I know just going up to Patty Canyon for a few minutes just has a very marked effect on my psychology. I just feel like an entirely different person. It's real strong medicine, and but I can see where the few people who profit from cutting these old growth forests might be concerned if they feel their livelihood's at stake. First of all, I think that it's short-sighted. I think that logging can be done in such a way that so as to sustain the yield for generations and generations to come. But the problem is that's not been our approach. We've tended to seriously overcut the forest. And you can see it, just moving from the east to the west. And so it's a much more critical problem right now.
When you talk about medicine, what is that medicine, or what is that, would you say it's strong medicine? I think we know what you mean, but what do you mean by that?
Well, for example, if I don't do it, I feel, it affects me physically. I don't sleep as well. I don't feel as well. I don't lecture or research as well. My blood pressure goes up, putting it in practical terms, if I don't get that sort of fix every so often. I don't need any convincing that this is a very basic part of my whole, physical, emotional, mental being. And I suppose I can rationalize it by pointing out that this kind of natural environment is how we evolved. We evolved in a natural environment, and we evolved in a way that for millions and millions of years, we lived with it. Our numbers were small enough that we didn't have that kind of impact on it. And and we learned that we had to live with nature and not fight against it. But our lives are now much more artificial, and it's more and more difficult to have that kind of an experience. This is why the whole question of wilderness, I think, is important too, because again, wilderness is basically our home. That's how we evolved, and it's only a very infinitesimally small part of our species history that we've lived in this artificial environment. Everybody knows what it's doing to us, physically and mentally. So I think we just have to convince the rest of our friends and neighbors and everyone else that it's absolutely essential for our survival.
Great. Yeah, that's good.
Just before Earth Day, 68, 69, and 70, okay? So it just coincided. It had nothing to do officially or formally with Earth Day, but it's interesting that this publication, Montana Business Quarterly, I think partly because I had a really concerned editor at the time, Ralph Kahn, who was from abroad, who was also concerned with the environment. And he got some of us on the faculty here to write articles for it. And this is by no means all of them. I know, for example, Arnie Silverman wrote one about coal, but I didn't find that one. But for example, here in '68 was an article by Clancy Gordon on air pollution, and he gives a history of the whole air pollution problem in the first half of his presentation. And the second half is a very much personal view of his part on what's wrong with the rest of the world and why they're not responding to this whole problem. Now, Clancy's main concern was air pollution. He was not that much, at least he wasn't that involved in some of our military concerns with nuclear war and so on. And his area was air pollution. But he had some very personal and controversial ideas about why we weren't solving this problem. But it's interesting to read this because he too was upset over the failure for the scientific community, the legal community, and so on, to really take this whole question and solve the problem. And at the very end of his presentation, he mentions the question of the catastrophe that will probably have to ensue before most people will take it seriously enough, and that so much of what we are doing to our environment is just goes so completely counter to our evolutionary history of what the environment should be and how we are upsetting it, and have we done this all in just a space of 100 or 200 years, whereas it took several billion years for the whole system to evolve. So his was very interesting because he gets kind of personal there. Well, these were just a couple of articles that I had written. Let's see which. The first one in 69 was about Montana and the Plowshare program. Plowshare was an effort to use the atom for peaceful purposes. And at that time, there was a suggestion that we try some nuclear explosions in eastern Montana for a variety of reasons. Underground, of course, maybe to connect bodies of water, underground bodies of water, to make some of the ground more permeable, to natural gas, and so on. These are perfectly valuable economic objectives. But on the basis of what other people had shown to be the case with these underground explosions, they were really quite hazardous, and not only to long-term possibilities of health, either from underground water or from cratering, from venting of these explosions, but let's say just from a formal point of view, we were not permitted to allow radioactivity to go from this country to another country in the test ban treaty. That was considered a violation, and putting these explosions in Montana was really quite risky from that point of view, because it would be just a short haul to Canada. And then a sort of utopian idea that I got from some others at the time about creating a university of survival, where we would, in order to survive, one thing the university has to do is to become much more conscious of the survival crisis. At that time, of course, this is 1970, we're still talking about the possibility of nuclear war, and even assuming that that has receded very much into the background, we obviously have plenty of global questions now to be concerned with, and so it seemed like it was logical to try to make the university much more actively involved and practically turn every department into a department that would somehow or other turn its particular expertise to this question of survival. Well, at that time, we were younger and more idealistic, and some of us did something along those lines. First of all, established an environmental studies department. And many people, even though departments themselves perhaps didn't turn themselves into just environmentally concerned entities, there were many individuals around campus that became affiliated with the whole environmental movement. Well, needless to say, we didn't succeed in turning the whole university into a survival U. There are some schools, I'm not sure how they fared around the country. For example, Evergreen College in Washington. I think there's a place in Wisconsin, and then I guess University of California, Santa Cruz tried that too. But I suspect that the press of such things as the Reagan Revolution and the rightward movement of students, more conservative thrust that students developed, where jobs and future success became such a overriding influence. I think this worked against the whole idea of a university of survival. But maybe we need to rethink this now. This whole question of what the university should be doing. No, anyway, those were just a couple of examples gleaned from that particular period to show you what the thinking was, what the atmosphere was at that time, of the first Earth Day. But it looks like we need a sequel from somebody younger.
Let's talk about the word environmentalist. Would you?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting word, and I guess there are still a few such people around. It's interesting in my own case. When I was actively teaching, I'm no longer. I'm retired now, but certainly when I was teaching, I was still trying to maintain a balance between my original professional background, which was in botany, research botany, with environmentalism. And one could be both. I consider myself an environmentalist as well as a botanist. Didn't seem to be any problem. I think there are more people like that in the earlier days. I think there might still be some few, well, those in the people like Ron Erickson in the environmental studies department, I would still consider an environmentalist. People like Tom Power in economics, I think, would probably still, John Duffield, people like that. But it's a relatively small number compared to what we used to have in the early days. It seems to be, in a way, a dying breed. Now, I'll admit in my own case that being retired and having visited countries in Eastern Europe as part of scientific exchange programs, where I maintained my interest in the environment. I always came back with lots of slides showing what was happening to the environment of those countries. In order to effect the formal exchange, it was necessary for me to be a botanist, and I had to do research. Not that I didn't want to, but I mean that was the aegis under which this was done. Environmentalism typically was something you did in your spare time, although you could spend a lot of time at it, and perhaps it was even more important in the long run. But in order to be able to do that, you had to have a specific professional area, a discipline, you see. And that's still the case. For example, I'm doing research now, which is really has nothing much to do with environmentalism, but has to do with, let's say, using plants as sources of antiviral and anti-cancer agents for humans. Well, I think that's important, and I don't have to rationalize doing that sort of work. But that does take up most of my spare time. I hope to be able to continue giving a seminar course here once a year on current environmental problems, which is designed not only for the campus community, but for the general public as well. And I hope to be able to restart that next year. That would be a formal course. And we'd take up as many of these, critical environmental issues as possible. But in my own case, and I suspect with others who would call themselves environmentalists, we've always had that dichotomy in our program. It, maintained our professional interest as well as a more general concern.
Maybe you could just give me a definition.
A definition of environmentalist? Oh, I've never really thought about it. But I think it's obviously someone who is concerned with the fate of the environment as it impinges on human survival. And I think that could include a lot of people. You don't have to be a professor to be an environmentalist. Almost anyone can be an environmentalist from that point of view.
I guess what I'm getting at is that I sort of feel that the word has been, the power has been taken out of it as soon as people like George Bush can call themselves environmentalists. Like it's a meaningless.
Well, that's the price you pay for that sort of thing. I mean, it's up to us to assess whether he's really concerned or not. It's true, people can call themselves environmentalists because everyone claims that they're concerned, but it's up to us to decide whether they're really concerned or not. No, I wouldn't, I don't think I'd want to change the term. It's better than ecologist, or ecology is sometimes misused. You're interested in the ecology. Ecology is a discipline. It's a science of the study of the environment, and that may be, may seem like a small, petty thing, but I think it's sometimes misused to, where you really mean environment, you talk about ecology. And ecology is an actual study discipline. And I don't think you have to be an ecologist to be an environmentalist.
I don't know if I like the word environmentalist or environment.
Well, there are a lot of people that don't like environmentalists. They use it as a cuss word now. You're just an environmentalist, as if, that's so superficial, that's so unimportant. Oh, he's just an environmentalist. That's why he's concerned with the forest. But maybe it's our job to explain this to the public. We have to get out and do more, perhaps, with the public on it. But I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it. Do you think it's a little too broad in scope?
Well, I just had this flash just sitting here that environment sort of harkens back to our whole 50s environment versus hereditary aspects of it. So and environment always seems to be something that's, it's something that we can we have a controlled environment indoors, change the environment with air conditioners. It seems like we're always talking about a more personal space. I guess maybe I'm kind of stretching towards the whole Gaia theory.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we could replace it with. We could say, since I think most environmentalists are really concerned with survival, you could perhaps call them survivalists, but then that term has been usurped by certain kinds of people that are only interested in their own, immediate personal survival, and they don't really care about the planet particularly or anyone else. They're going to think that they're going to survive in their own little corner, their own fallout shelters, like around Livingston. But
I have a question about environmentalists. One of the things that seems to a certain extent that environmentalists have become very almost missionary, saying, well, gee, we almost destroyed the world. Now we're going to just run right out and save it. And isn't that the same, it's flip side of the same coin. It's like we haven't set the coin aside at all. We've just decided that, okay, now we're going to, it's like it still assumes it's such an anthropomorphic way of looking at the whole ecosystem that we're still going to run right out now and fix it all up. And I guess I just wonder, who do you have your chips on?
Well, I think that, certainly for the foreseeable future, that we have to make the argument in the case of our species. Because, well, especially since I don't consider our species any, that unique in terms of its relationship to the environment. It's unique in terms of what it can do to an environment. That's all the more reason to concentrate on us. But I think it's just natural for people to be concerned with their own survival and that of their, those descendants, those to come. I don't see too much of a dichotomy there.
What about the Earth's first premise that the human species is no more valuable than some little rare, fragile thing, little plant?
Yeah, well, I think that's okay as a philosophy, but I don't think it's going to be effective. I think you've got to first convince people that we've got to save the environment for us. And then, I don't have a problem with it because I think that if we survive, so will the others. I think we're all in it together. I don't think there's any way out. And that's such a philosophical question that I personally, enjoy seeing this great diversity, but I don't think you're going to move most people unless you convince them it's important for them. I don't think you can get enough people who are concerned with the, let's say, the snail darter as such, and to be effective in that kind of concern, let's say with endangered species, I think we have to show how we are part of the whole fabric, we're part of the whole picture. Just no, I think perhaps you know, there's been a shift in that direction. Maybe 15, 20 or more years ago, there were relatively few people that were concerned with the whole question of biodiversity and nature, you know, survival of the natural world for its own sake. I think there are far more people like that now. But
I get the feeling that there's a whole class of people who are sort of living in a closet who just say, we're here, let's use it up, there's no hope, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Screw it, let's just take what we've got.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that must be part of the problem, that we can't, you know, can't move ahead, that too many people like that. But I think there are fewer people like that, and more people who see the impact, you know, that everything has on everyone else. And well, I think that's part of, you know, these Earth Day celebrations, is to pinpoint that. And of course, there's very interesting recent Farm Aid celebration that they had. This is what they've had this every few years, I guess. And this is the first time that they really made a big pitch. In fact, it was the major thrust of the whole program, was environmental aspects of agriculture. And here were these young people, you know, from Alabama and elsewhere, who you might normally think are quite unconcerned with the environmental aspects, who were obviously very much concerned with. That was kind of very heartening to see that. Always these country western types taking an interest in this. So, you know, there are causes for optimism, and we just have to push them as far as we can.
Well, how much time have we got?
Well, oh gosh, I'd hate to be a seer for the future. But, you know, after all, 20 years ago, they said we had 10 years. I think we can, all right, so we've had more than 10 years. But I think we're probably getting closer and closer to that kind of deadline, I would say. Because, you know, the problems that we're getting now are cosmic in scope, you know, and whereas previously they weren't. So, but now, you know, we're affecting I'm sure, I mean, there's still some question about the global warming, but I think that's, I think the evidence is certainly more on the side of there being some evidence for some concrete statistics in that direction, that the global climate is warming up, and who knows what that could do. And ozone is still being depleted. And here in Missoula, you know, we see what the effects of water contamination can be. I mean, that's pretty basic. We know our infrastructures, certainly in this country and maybe around the world even worse, are deteriorating. So I can't get, you know, I wouldn't want to give you a time. I think we have a limited time, and we have to, you know, just get at it.
Do you think it's odd the way the majority of Missoulans have reacted or not reacted to this water crisis?
Yes, it is. It is. I think there should have been much more of a public outcry, although, you know, there are letters to the editor about it. There again, the way it's been presented, it's as far as this particular contamination is concerned, well, it was the fault of a particular lift station. So there's some kind of dereliction of duty there. But no, you don't see people, you know, really demonstrating and going to the city council or going to the mayor. It's a different time now. I don't know quite how to explain it, and whether it's are becoming so tied to the television experience now, which is basically a passive experience. That it might just I don't know. He was deadening all these natural instincts, natural impulses. I don't know.
How are you
Your guess is as good as mine.
How are you going to celebrate Earth Day?
Well, I feel that I'm celebrating it now. There is an International Earth Day as well, but I don't know what the implications are there. The UN has was it an Earth Week, which is different, and I've wondered why the two weren't synchronized. I don't know if you have any notions about that. I guess and if I feel up to it, I might take the walk up. And I've done that before, and so I might do that. But somehow I feel that this experience is about as profound a involvement as I can get.
Do you own a car?
Do I own a car? Yes.
I've never seen you drive a car. I've
Well,
never seen Flo
that's
drive a car.
okay. Well, we're masters of symbolic gestures in this household. And whether we are having any impact, who knows? That's the thing, because we bike almost everywhere. And, oh, yeah, at least. Until, since we came here, basically, I guess we got a bike. Oh, okay. Flo knows the details on that. Okay. So we've been biking when maybe we're 3 or 4 professors. Students didn't bike at all. No one biked. Well, just a few.
John Laurie biked.
John Laurie, of course, he came after we did. He would be one of the few in the early days. And then there was, what was the name of that, what was he? A chiropractor? Willard? Willard the osteopath with his cowboy hat. He was so unique. Everybody knew him. The only one riding a bike around town when we first came.
The high school kids thought it was not bicycle. It was interesting.
Nobody bicycled. I mean, the college students didn't bicycle. There were maybe 3 or 4 professors who were biking around campus, and that was it. I mean, you knew them all because so that's changed. That changed quite a bit. Now, of course, it's so typical. Aside from the fad nature of the mountain bike, it's a hazard. It's become its own hazard on campus. But at least it's good to see so many people biking. You don't see too many adults, past the university age, biking around town. I guess.
You do more now, Nick. More women are stopping with their bicycles.
With just an ordinary bike.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do see more. It's not really a big thing, but cycling is big in general here in Missoula. So we've been doing that for, since the 50s.
Do you guys, do you have anything to say about how you deal with your garbage?
Well, Flo is sort of the expert on that. We've
I compost my garbage.
we do most of our wet garbage is composted.
And then I start composting the garbage.
So what other masters of symbolic gestures, what other symbolic gestures do you undertake?
Aside from well, those are the main. Those are the main things: the recycling and bicycling, as much as possible. And we no longer. We used to burn more wood than we do. Now we just do it occasionally in the fall and the spring and evening when it's windy enough. So that's a sacrifice that I've made because I used to really enjoy chopping the wood and burning it. And I don't get very much of that anymore. And we cross-country ski. We just about given up on the downhill. I'm not completely given up. I'm going to do it once a year at Marshall, as long as it's there. But see, she's always giving a minority report there. In fact, you really should run this through Flo, because the whole thing should be run through her. You should have her edit. You should have her edit this. Yeah, but she's not
I'll
shy.
let you wear a paper bag over your head.
But she's not shy about.
Recycled paper bag.
And so, I think cross-country skiing is a great sport, and we've got to eventually do away with downhill skiing, I think, because, well, not while you're skiing, it's fine, but it's the whole technology, especially for building these huge destination resorts, the amount of energy that's used in a ski resort.
You can't tell me you're opposed to the Lola deal?
Oh, well, I'm certainly opposed to that, in principle, just to do that much violence to that mountain and what it would imply in terms of the environmental. Well, first of all, just looking at it, I think, is very critical, very important. Talking about, maintaining one's sanity. I think that's important to our psychological well-being, to see that mountain there. And then if they're really, really serious about a destination resort, if they're talking about putting an airport in Stevensville, and 10,000 people minimum, you figure here any one day, and with all the transportation and what it implies, and it's I think completely unjustified. It just goes counter to the way we should be moving now. You see, we should be doing everything to reduce the number of such places. And of course, in a sense, the economics is slowly taking care of that, because more and more of them are going out of business. It's become a very expensive proposition. And eventually, I think, it might disappear. Well, maybe not completely, but...
Well, to say nothing of Montana for the Montanans,
that's fine as a general principle, but I wouldn't mind if they wanted to come out, because we're going to be a destination for a lot of people. As long as we have the population we do in this country and the need for people to get out for recreation, we have something that is very unique and very valuable to people, our environment here. And okay, I could see if they want to come out, do winter sports, let them do cross-country skiing, because that has relatively little impact on the environment. It's certainly a lot healthier for them too.
The downhill skiing is better than the snowmobiling.
It's better than snowmobiling. Oh yeah, if you want to make a list, a hierarchy, the snowmobile is my favorite peeve. And I understand that, they're going to take over Yellowstone for winter. We haven't been over there in the winter. We always talked about getting there. Of course, we're going to take a snow coach, I guess, to get in. But that's at least a lot of people going in, and I think they can maintain them. They don't, they have exhaust controls. One of the things that really struck me when I was skiing up in Patty Canyon once, just doing a little cross-country ski touring up on one of these side roads, and for miles away there was a snowmobile, and I could hear it, and it just disrupted the whole scene. All of a sudden, I heard something come up behind me. It was a Jeep, okay? But the only time I heard it was when just a few feet of me. I said, well, I can live with that. He wasn't tearing up the ground. I mean, there was good enough snow for him to go. And he went up ahead. I could hardly hear him. I saw him for a few seconds, and that was it. I think we can, somehow, we we can live with some aspects of our technology, but not with others. And the snowmobile is still a favorite peeve of
Do you
mine.
remember when that forest ranger up in Glacier Park shot the snowmobile?
Was it a ranger that did that?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember a snowmobile being shot, but somehow or other I thought it had been just an irate private citizen.
It was a forest ranger who
Uh-huh.
told this guy 3 different times not to come onto that land because
Mhm.
of the
Yeah.
little fragile things that were
Yeah,
he was killing
Right.
off under there, and finally
So-
just got so frustrated
Right.
and shot the thing.
right. But the snowmobile community is still quite large and potent
And vocal, they're getting
and vocal. And, you know, Yellowstone needs all the support it can muster because they're desperately asking people to go there and cross-country ski so that they'll have something to counter.
Mhm.
Because I understand weekends, especially, there's mostly, you know, locals that come in there, and boy, you might as well. It's just, you know, I don't think it's at all compatible with the whole idea of a national park. It just doesn't fit, you know, what the national park is for or about. So.
All-terrain vehicles are terrible, they tear up.
Oh yeah, well, the trouble they have there in California in the deserts, for example. Well, we haven't really touched on, you know, specific problem like population, and I suppose partly because we have a large family, so I can rationalize that.
I'd like to get back to some of the spiritual aspects of it just a little bit, just for a second. I meditate and I say my own prayers to my own creator or my own creation, creative spirit. And I was wondering, do you put the earth in your prayers, or do you put this concept? How do you meditate on this or think about this when you have your own private moment?
Well, I suppose, first of all, I don't have that need, or at least don't seem to have that need to formally, or if you want to call that a formal expression. And I guess I satisfy that urge by going into as wild a place as possible. And somehow or other that does something to me. It's not in a cerebral way, you know, it's something that I just sort of feel. It's a kind of total experience. And I guess I don't have the need to pray in that sense. Just an occasional celebration of some major holiday, for example, that where we go through certain rituals, where the ritual aspect seems to be important to me. I don't really believe literally what I'm saying in terms of, you know, the way you would translate it from the Hebrew to the English. That has some kind of an emotional effect that seems to be important to experience occasionally. But well, I guess, you know, for one thing, my involvements outside of what I would consider my own personal benefit, things that social concerns seems to be one way that we express our feelings about, you know, our relation to the rest of the world is through activities, political activities, environmental activities, teaching. You know, in my case, teaching has that quality about it. Well, you have to be careful, you know, in a situation like that where you are expressing an opinion rather than what could be considered a fact, that it would be obvious that this is an opinion. But this kind of direct, you know, personal contact with people, which includes the teaching situation, is also an emotional experience. but I guess, you know, my concerns about what's happening outside the rest of the world is, you know, the way I would express any kind of feelings of unity with nature and the rest of the world. And of course, when you have children and grandchildren, that's an obvious if you tie to the world, to the future.
Do you have anything you want to say to the people who are going to follow in your...
Well, no, I just assume, you know, let things stand where they are. And, I think you really given me quite a workout here. I don't think there's much more I can delve into, much more I can fathom for you. You've reached pretty deep, getting deeper all the time here too. And well, I was really interested in your, you know, concern with the psychological aspects of it, because, you know, I realize that's important, maybe basic to why people do this sort of thing in the first place.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm so interested in that right now is because I feel that there's an incredibly strident, self-righteous thing on both sides coming up here. I mean, with a lot of issues, not just environmental issues with industry and earth first on the opposite end of that continuum, but pro-choice issues and the whole thing. I mean, like, everybody's lining up and just
that's interesting. Yeah, that's true. There's always been that tendency, I guess, where people feel strongly about something. They tend to be that way. But it's see, we went through that kind of genesis when we had our committees, and we had to decide what our approach would be. There was quite a debate about which way to go. Are we going to be advocates, you know, express our point of view? For example, on this whole question, say, of nuclear war and so on. Here the military has all of the media exposure that they want, and they express their point of view. There's no pretense that they're being objective about it. So why shouldn't we on the other side? And we had quite a debate. That somehow or other, in that movement at least, the idea that we should be just as objective as possible prevailed during any kind of a formal presentation. Be as objective as possible, lay the facts out as you see them, you know, and then in the question and answer period, perhaps you could, you know, be more, express, you know, your opinion. But that we felt that this was important in our political setting. But somehow, perhaps, you know, we've lost that thrust, and
well,
it's become more difficult. Well, I don't know, Ray. It may be that the issues are becoming more critical, they're impinging more and more on the individual. So it's becoming more difficult to follow that approach. It's, you know, I think...
You mean the advocacy thing?
Yeah, the advocacy. Well, if you've got somebody who feels their profits or their jobs are involved, it's difficult for them to be objective. On the other hand, if you're living at a place where they're clear-cutting like hell around you, it's a little difficult to be objective. Maybe in that one little instance, there's some scientific justification for a clear cut. You know, maybe it will grow back and maybe it'll be less diseased or something, but it's more difficult when this becomes more widespread, when these, you know, when these problems increase in intensity, it becomes more difficult. That may be part of it, I don't know.
Also, I think that, you know, you don't get any press coverage unless you are striking. If you give a calm, balanced point of view, you maybe get a little something stuck away in the back pages. But if you're strident,
Well,
We can't pick flow up. Would you like to
yeah.
repeat that?
You want me to get her?
No, she's not going to
She
come
won't
over here.
come.
But if you'd like to deal with that media issue. No, you don't have to.
I just think that people, the press is always wanting to cover something that is
More controversial?
strong. And if you give a mild presentation of your point of view, the tendency, if you do get coverage, is to be stuck away in the back pages. And I think that if you are strident and, controversial, you're more likely to get front page coverage.
You might get, that's true. But I think in terms of long-term continued exposure of the issues, maybe the media are not doing such a bad job. First of all, you have a lot more going on, let's say on television. You have all kinds of programs now. And most of them tend to be reasonably objective. But they cover the whole spectrum of these issues. Too many of them are on public television, maybe not enough on the more commercial channels. But there's really no excuse for a person not to be informed about some of these things. And this is something new. Now, it's true, in the early days here in Missoula, the Missoulian would occasionally have an environmental reporter like Don Schwenneson, who did a superb job, and he would interview people and take whatever they were saying, and and you would get all points of view from him. He's no longer doing that, but they, let's say in the case of Missoulian, they have somebody like Sherry Devlin now, and I think she does some pretty in-depth reports, and I think that most of the issues are being discussed in the media. So,
well, if we're going to talk about the Missoulian, we can't leave out the fate of Dick Manning.
okay, that's an interesting question because okay, that's an interesting question because on that particular issue, they seem to be quite reluctant to give much coverage now on the question of timber, question of land management, timber especially, because that's the issue that was involved. Let's say on this water business, I was doing a great job. I thought, they gave really quite an in-depth story on the contamination, on the aquifer, and so on. But on the timber question, they seem to be somewhat derelict in really.
And is that where, what's his name?
Dick Manning, right. He was, I guess in a way, he perhaps was being an advocate for a point of view. If they want to argue that, that's not his prerogative, well, they can say, well, you'll just have to write your articles more objectively. But the point is, I don't know whether he was given that option. And in any case, there does not seem to be a very active discussion going on in the pages of the Missoulian about the whole question of timber management. They do have an occasional letter from, people like Keith Hammer, or who's the other one from up there, from the Swans? Steve Kelly. Mm-hmm. There'll be letters from people like that, and they offered to print a comment if I wanted to make a comment on the question of land management, especially timber management, from the point of view of what Bob Marshall said about this in a little booklet that he wrote some years ago, which I just happened to get hold of, and which just amazed me in terms of how much insight it had to the present issue. unfortunately, they held on to the thing so long that I kind of lost the incentive, the impetus to do it. But they did offer me that possibility. So.
I have a question for you because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting that you view environmental issues in terms of the impact that they'll have on your lifestyle or our lifestyle, basically.
Our survival.
Our survival.
That's,
And
you know.
I just guess that I think, and this is more a discussion than a question or a feeling that I have, that what rights have we've done everything to enhance the ease and comfort of our lives at the expense of the environment to this extent, that I just feel like we're so imbalanced with all that liberty and privilege that we've taken, that instead of caretakers, we've become abusers. That I guess I am looking now, I'm seeing that in my perspective, that I feel like we really don't have any rights to look at environmental issues in terms of human survival, I mean, alone, as that being the primary concern. But we have to link our survival in equal terms with survival of certain trees even. I mean, again, that's maybe getting more into that Earth First perspective. I'm not saying that's not my personal philosophy, but I just am feeling we have no rights to say anymore that we come first, because we didn't do a very good job of that. We came first. We've been coming first. And I just wonder, what...
Well, yeah, I would never say that's the basis for, my interest. I was just talking to you, kind of, as in terms of what are the practical ways that you attack some of these problems, and that my feeling is that the most effective way to do it is on the basis of self-interest. That's all. I'm just from a practical point of view. I'm not making any moral judgments about it. It's not a matter of, I'm concerned with the survival question, and I think this is the way to get at it. And I think it's being done. I think it's because that's what generally proves effective. So I guess, I'm not that much of a philosopher. In a way, I guess I consider myself more pragmatic. And having been through the wars, where we, had to confront the people directly, personally, that's been my experience. I think, Flo has been active too in public groups. So maybe she agrees with me, maybe she doesn't. You have to. They've been very practical too, very pragmatic, and in terms of their political clout, they go right to the jugular when it comes to these issues. So.
When you say self-interest, how do you define that? What are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of survival of the species, and then on top of that, survival of the species in a biologically healthy way. That's, what I would consider self-interest. And I think that's the most effective approach. Ray, you disagree, or you just look a little skeptical?
No, I'm on to something else. I'm thinking about this advocacy thing.
Right.
It's like, okay, so, like advocacy, like say that's why Dick Manley got fired, right? Because he was coming from an advocate's position. But really, advocacy isn't on the far left of the continuum anymore. Advocacy is like in the middle of it. To me, to my mind, just looking at the styles of how we're
Well,
going to get around to doing this. I mean, it's like, I read this article about, in this month's Smithsonian, about Dave Foreman starting Earth First. And his whole concept was that they needed something really radical to make the wilderness organizations look like they were
No.
middle of the road.
Well, sit up and take notice, right?
And then, I mean, finally they became, when they really started discussing it, they became more and more involved with that premise, and that was, I mean, they became committed to it, to that whole thing, rather than just pulling it out on these special occasions to get some, because he was originally a lobbyist for the Wilderness Society. He just thought of this.
That's Foreman.
So I'm just thinking about that advocacy thing.
Well,
I mean, that's got to be redefined.
It's
They have to be advocates in order to really, get involved and get going in any movement.
Well, the goddamn timber industry, they're the biggest advocates of all. Nobody accuses them of advocacy. I mean, I just think that this advocacy has to.
it's a sticky one. It's a sticky one.
Was it like a big hassle to, when the environmental studies program was being put together? Was that a big hassle? Because I know that EVST is, part of the thing is advocacy. Was that a difficult thing to get the powers that be to accept?
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't remember that was a particular problem, although, establishment of any new department is generally. And fortunately, it happened at a time when we had a little leeway, little flexibility. I would, maybe they're viewed, and some of the students or staff are viewed occasionally as being advocates, but I don't view their program as being an advocacy program. And I would have a problem if it were. I would have a problem if it were. But I don't have a problem because I don't think it is. I think that, they present the facts as objectively as they can. Now, if the facts inexorably point in a certain direction, you can't help that. But I think as far as their approach is concerned, they're being objective in their courses, in their curriculum. So you can't prevent individuals, especially students, from then going out and taking some sort of political stance, which then becomes a matter of advocacy. You advocate a certain political point of view or political act. And I don't know in case of Dick Manning either, whether he was really, being an advocate in the sense of saying that I believe, that is, I, Dick Manning, believe that we should do so and so. I'm not convinced that he was. I think he was pretty much presenting the facts as they were, in terms of the timber question. But they were just a little too sensitive. Because if you look at the facts objectively, it's pretty damning, especially in terms of the use of private timberlands.
Too sensitive to...
Well, to the private timber interests. So I don't know whether I would consider him...
How many advertising dollars go to the Missoulian from the timber industry as compared to
Well, I don't know whether it's necessary. There are no obvious ads, are there, that the timber industry runs? Occasionally when they have that, that big thing, the log haul or something like that. They had a couple of big ads every once in a while.
Unless it's a
But,
matter of cutting subscriptions, putting out subscriptions if they're too local supported.
Oh, we'll never know what that relationship is. I mean, the day that becomes public is the day the Missoulians cuts that. I'll have to cut that. I do too,
I'm
because
sure we've got an hour
we've
and a
got
half.
so much good stuff here.
Yeah.
We don't wanna get any more.
Yeah. We were wondering if you could, just speaking to Ray or to the camera, give a greeting to MCAT, because we're gonna punctuate our programming on Sunday with welcoming greetings.
We got
to-
Flo tucked into that one, so let's shoot it from the front porch. They can be standing behind the recycling sign,
Sure.
or do you want it to be two?
Now, what do you want us? You want us to say?
I'm gonna wanna have you open up onto your, survival university. You don't have to do that right now.
Oh, okay. Let's see which one that is. I think that's. Find out for sure. Yeah, this is the one. Working together to see if some of these plant extracts can have an effect on
I know, that sounds really
human diseases. This is not kind of an unusual thing. Although I guess people have been using plant medicines for a long time. But
I know.
this is a new
That's
group
true.
of compounds. So
Okay, when you're ready, you wanna grab the top book.
okay.
Great, now I'm gonna stop it. Okay, when you're ready.
I'd like to close it, and I want it open in the summer and closed in the winter.
Mhm.
Quite figuring out how to do.
Well, that takes a real really good press.
Okay, ready? Grab it.
But I see all these magazines here, and torch things open, and it just, I just need it.
Okay, just hold it there, stand by.
I'm very good at acquiring, cluttering up.
Me too. That was a good, we moved last summer.
Where are you
living-
living now?
Well, in Southport West,
Oh.
it's our first house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm buying it, and it's pretty exciting.
Okay.
Boy, that's the only good
Okay, you
thing
wanna
about
close
moving
it and
is
put it
that
over?
She doesn't, I can't say there's nothing else good about it.
Yeah, it's hard, but we've been in this house over 30 years now.
Tired of seeing our pictures in the paper now, be on TV.
Fine, arrogant.
That's right.
You guys.
That's what